Yeah? One quick test. Nice. Morning, everyone. A little more energy than that, maybe. Yes, morning. Yeah. Cool. So I'm going to go through and I'm going to give you some statistics. I'm going to use some quotes from a couple of different articles, and I want to give you a chance early on to kind of find these resources and do more research and reading later on. I just learned this fun fact as you're kind of opening this link to get to the document if you want to. There's two, so we'll do this one first. I just learned that there's room for error in QR codes where if certain bits are missing, you can still get the whole thing, so they're more error proof. Did y'all know that? I didn't know that was a brand new thing for me, so today I learned. This first article, I'll reference kind of some statistics as we go through. They all that I reference, I think, come from this article, so you can pull that up and kind of check those out. And then the second one, anyone that wants that, have it? Hopefully yes, 3, 2, 1, go. The second article is more of a thought leadership piece around kind of the evolution of how we work as a whole, the evolution of automation, and the impact that has had on society as a whole. And I think it has some pretty interesting implications and tie-ins to the impact that AI will have and is having on developer experience so far. So we'll start off with one of those big numbers, which is the potential market for the investment or the dollars associated with AI by 2027, which on here is listed as $407 billion. It's an estimate, it's just a random number, but it is a very big number, and I think it does play directly into the idea of the growth of AI from both a consumer perspective, from a developer perspective, and an investor perspective. And on the consumer side, I think we've all probably seen this and are not surprised by these numbers, but something called ChatGPT, which we'll talk about as we go through this talk, within the first 5 days had 1 million users. Within the first 6 months had 100 million users. And those numbers might be slightly outshined now. Anyone heard of something called Threads? If you're on Twitter, you probably have seen or heard about Threads, which is Facebook, Instagram's alternative. I forget what the numbers are. Does anybody know what it is? It was 70 million users in the first couple of days or something ridiculous. Anybody know that? 100 million in X number of days. So it's outshined ChatGPT's growth, but that growth is still a very large number from a consumer perspective of signing up for an application. Make my notes a little bigger. Cool. So another interesting one is that not only are consumers seeing the potential impacts or the interest, companies are seeing this as well. And so based on that article that you may or may not have pulled up, 35% of companies are hiring engineers to either work directly in AI or maybe work on AI-related problems. This is companies seeing that there's a lot of future in this. And this also has implications with something that I think we'll talk a lot about, the perspective of, does AI replace jobs? That's the most common question that people have. We'll talk directly about that. And I think this has really big implications on, does it replace jobs? Does it create jobs? Do jobs change? What does that actually look like? But there is this idea, according to this research, that companies are at least investing in the future in terms of AI. And these are basically just kind of random numbers, right? They're all guesses. They're only based on a limited amount of research. So the numbers only mean that much. But what they do imply to me, and the consistent theme that I see, is change. I think it's probably undeniable that things are going to change based on the impact of AI. Whether that's for good, whether that's for bad, whether it's neutral, whether it is not as big as we think it is, whether it changes way more than we think it will, change is coming. And so as I think about change, I think about my 10 years of experience, 10 plus years of experience working in developer experience. So I consider myself to be 3 things: a developer, a speaker, and a teacher. I've done some combination of all of those professionally for over 10 years now, which is kind of hard to believe. I never thought I would do any of this. I never thought I would be the person on stage. I never thought I would teach. I wouldn't consider myself a teacher, but I fell into a role called technical evangelist at Microsoft, and that's how I started my career. So at the beginning of my career, I was giving presentations, I was giving talks, I was on stages, I was doing workshops, I was doing one-on-ones with startups and students and engaging in the developer communities, and I fell in love with teaching, something I never thought I would do. because everything that I do comes back to teaching. And I am in the fortunate position to work full-time for myself as a content creator, creating content that teaches and impacts people and developers all across the world. And over the course of my career, I've stood on many stages. I've given lots of talks. I've had keynotes. I've spoken internationally. I've created a lot of content. I have a platform. I have an audience. And I could continue to brag about myself and my accolades, etc. And that would be really good for my ego, and I do really enjoy it, but I have to be really honest with you. On this stage, with this audience, with this topic, I feel just a little bit like a fraud. This is a safe space, I imagine, so I can be honest with you and kind of talk about why that is. I feel like a fraud for two reasons. Let's get the GIF to go away so it doesn't flash too much. But there's two main reasons that I feel like this. The first is, as I'm giving a talk on AI, I realize I don't really know that much about AI. And that has really big implications on how this talk is structured, because what I'm not going to do is explain to you technical terms. I'm not going to explain how machine learning works. I'm not going to explain how data science works, because I can't do that. I don't actually know those things. I know some words, but I don't know the details of how all of this stuff works behind the scenes. That's not me. The point of that, though, is I can talk about the impact that it's had as your everyday regular developer. I don't know how you feel about your skills. I certainly throw myself into the category of just regular developer. So without understanding how all of it works, I can recognize the impact that it's had on how I work day to day and how it's going to impact already yourselves, how it will continue to impact developer audiences. Now, the second reason I feel a little bit awkward maybe is ChatGPT had significant influence in writing the title and the abstract for this talk. This may or may not surprise you. What you don't see is a screenshot of me telling or asking ChatGPT, I'm going to give a talk about some things. Can you suggest to me 10 different titles that I could use? Shows one of those titles, then use that title in a follow-up prompt. Say, here's the title of the talk. Here are the things I want to talk about. Can you write an abstract? Now, for anybody that's curious, you can take a screenshot of this, or you'll have the slides, access the slides later, and you can go and compare that output to what is written on the Refactor website and see how much I've changed and tweaked, etc. But I use ChatGPT in this case specifically for creativity, to spark imagination, to give me a starting point. And so I feel a little weird having done that, but it takes me to take that to the next level. It takes me to put that in my voice. It takes me to have that be real to what I'm going to talk about. And it takes me to be on the stage talking to you today. ChatGPT can help me get to this point, but ChatGPT can't do this. And we'll circle back to that from a community aspect as we wrap up this talk. But ChatGPT is amazing, but there are many things that ChatGPT can't do and can't replace. So, this section is kind of titled History of Developer Experience. We're actually just going to kind of talk a lot about history and themes and trends and that sort of stuff, and we'll get to developer experience and have like a developer-centric product focus as we kind of wrap up this section. And I'll start by kind of referencing Bob Dylan, a quote, or not a quote, but a title from Bob Dylan. Does anyone know Bob Dylan? This is no, casual. I wouldn't consider myself necessarily a Bob Dylan fan. That was my dad's favorite artist, like by far. I think he wanted to name me Dylan, and my mom was like, we're absolutely not doing that. But one song that I've listened to a decent amount is The Times They Are A-Changin'. And there's probably an even simpler cliche that we can all relate to that gets the same point across. Cliche you've probably heard many times. You've probably been annoyed when you've heard it because it's so cliche. But the idea that the only constant is change. Heard that before? Probably, yes. So when I think about how things change, I think about not getting left behind. Because we think about as humans, as a species, as a society, Change has been a constant, and we're continuing to evolve. We're continuing to ideally get better, to invent things that make things easier so that we can evolve and make progress, et cetera, in life. And in the context of potentially getting to the conversation of AI, I think it's really important to call out people that don't adapt, not fade away, they fall behind. We adapt to many things every day. We adapt to new things every year. We have to do that. Even in your job, think about what you do for your job versus last year, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Think about how the technology has changed. And one interesting idea is I started my career off at Microsoft as a technical evangelist. I've spent the majority of my career in some similar title, most recently developer advocate. Those job titles didn't exist 20 years ago. Even in 2013, when I started as a technical evangelist, I would tell people my title and they would laugh. In fairness, I laughed when Microsoft said, hey, we have this technical evangelist position open, and I had no idea what that was either. Those titles didn't exist 20 years ago because now things have changed, now the roles have changed, and they will continue to change. And one thing I think about a lot through loss or significant changes in your life is you have the potential to live a different reality from minute to minute. The reality of the world you live in can drastically change in a minute. Death, starting a new job, moving, immediately over some finite amount of time, your life is definitively different than it was before that moment. And for me, one of my new realities is my daughter. So this is Jamie, my daughter and I, on the plane to Atlanta. My wife and I flew to Atlanta together. My wife then went to Tampa, so we flew together to Atlanta, split ways for me to come here, and then we're actually flying back to Atlanta to meet each other to go home in Memphis. And so from May 17th to May 18th, the day my daughter was born, my reality is drastically different. The world that I live in today is drastically different than pre-May 17th. In a good way, I think, so far. Fun fact, last night was the first night that I've slept 8 hours straight since May 18th, which is really nice. Yes. And when I think about these changes and new alternate realities, I think about how you handle change and how you adapt. And I think about all these big transitions. When I was in middle school, people said high school would be so hard. When I was in high school, people said college is a totally different ballgame. When I graduated college, they said the real world is a totally different thing, but I feel like I've always handled that gracefully myself. I've handled change well. I embrace change. I have a positive outlook on change and next steps and journeys and all these things. But not everyone shares that optimism, which brings in these people. The back in my day people, the people who look at the way it was in their day, and they fight the fact that it's different today. They don't think it should in some ways be easier for a generation, or if they do, they make sure to call out how much more difficult it was for them 10, 15, 20, 50 years ago when they did X, Y, and Z thing in comparison to how people are able to do that thing now. We have a few people that know that type, maybe in your family, maybe friends, etc. They're adverse to change, they're reluctant to change, but this is, again, the epitome of the evolution of who we are. We change and evolve and get better, ideally, every single day. And I've worked with a lot of people that are in this situation of self-diagnosing plateauing. They've plateaued. This is as good as my job gets. This is as good as my salary gets. This is as good as my work environment gets, culture gets, etc. And I take a very different stance to that. As you might expect, I'm a millennial. So I have almost this entitled opinion of how the world should be that people love to judge about millennials. I think I should make more money. I think I should have access to more things. I do think I should work less hours. And I 100% stand behind the idea that that should be the case. There's no reason we shouldn't be constantly making progress in every aspect of our lives that make us happy or detract from that happiness. And I've done kind of some motivational speaking, kind of focusing on that in your career, targeting the fact that if you're unhappy with your job, go find a different job. If you're unhappy with your manager, go find a different manager. If you want to make more money, find a way to make more money. If you want a new title, work towards getting that new title. And I don't want to underestimate that that takes work. And I don't want to sell that those things happen overnight. What I do want to sell, though, is if you have things that you can fix, you work towards fixing them. Again, the epitome of how we've evolved as people, as a society, over the course of forever. So the question that people have is, will AI take developer jobs? I'll give you a really short answer. The answer is yes. But in probably a much less dramatic way than people fear. Because mostly my answer up until now doing research for this has been no. But I think that's a little short-sighted, and I think it doesn't quite tell the whole story, which we'll dive into. But the short answer for me right now is yes, but not in the way that we may fear. And this is a common fear. 77% of people, according to that first article that I shared, fear their job being replaced by AI. And we kind of go through maybe the evolution of inventions and call out a couple that have had significant impact. The printing press was created, which gave us the ability to document in a way that was unprecedented. We no longer had to depend on word of mouth. We had documentation that we could refer back to. Look at something like the telephone. Now we have the ability to connect to people in our city, in our state, in our country, across the world, to share learnings, to share thoughts. We're getting more connected. You think about the airplane, which enables me to work with developers outside of my community in person, which allows me to be here. And then ultimately you think about the internet, which is the way we're able to instantaneously connect with people across the world to share data, to share knowledge, to learn, to iterate, to continue to get better. There have been major innovations throughout the course of history, and we have arguably become better because of it. Through the course of that change, though, and this is a quote from that second article, which is, again, more of a kind of thought leadership piece and less about statistics. But the quote here is, every time we go through a wave of automation, whole classes of jobs go away. Yes, jobs will go away. But new classes of jobs get created. And that's probably not much of a surprise. That probably seems very simple. But maybe that also gets a little tricky when we look at a few extra numbers from the first article, which is that 400 million jobs could be lost. Keyword of could, because these are all just projections, so none of this is a guarantee, obviously, but 400 million jobs could be lost. On the flip side of that, the bright side is 97 million jobs could be created. That's great. But losing 400, gaining 97 has you kind of scratching your head of like, maybe that's not the outcome that we're looking for, because that seems like a pretty net negative, not a net positive. But another quote I'll let you read, but the end of this refers back to the idea of the total number of jobs not decreasing. The total number of jobs are there. They're different. They're augmented. But because of that, we have all become more prosperous. We're able to do more. We're able to build more. We're able to solve more problems. We're able to connect more. We have become more prosperous through these changes along the way. There was something really interesting in that article that I read that also kind of adds a different perspective to this, one that I had never heard. And I'm not sure if this is pronounced Jevons or Javons. Has anyone heard of this paradox before? Jevons? Thank you. I'm not surprised that came from you, to be honest. I could see it. So you could go and read the Wikipedia article. The short of this is, the summation is, if we can do things more efficiently, many people fear that we have less people doing that thing, right? If we have 100 units of work to be done and I can do 10 times more of those units per a given amount of time than I used to, that means there's less people that are needed to do 100 units. That makes sense? And that's what people fear right now. They fear AI will replace our jobs because they just don't need us because AI is going to do it for us. The other aspect of this, though, is that if we become more efficient at doing something, instead of just only looking at the finite amount of work that we're doing right now, why don't we look at what we're potentially capable of doing with this increased efficiency? So where many people are expecting jobs to just be gone, maybe the flip side of this is there's that many more jobs because what we see on the horizon is beyond anything we ever imagined. What we're able to do now, what we're able to build now, is beyond anything we ever thought we were capable of. Again, no guarantees. These are numbers and guesses and ways to think about stuff. But that certainly seems like a possibility to me. And I go back, kind of tying this into more of a developer-focused, think back to 10, 15, 20 plus years ago, and if you wanted to build an application and you wanted to host your application, you had to have a server, a physical server that you own, that you had somewhere. You had to patch it, you had to update it, you had to do fault tolerance, you had to have a building that could survive earthquakes, or you didn't and you just lost. But you had to do all of those things yourself, right? So that was people's jobs, right? People's jobs were to update, maintain, patch, all that stuff for that. Think about, from my perspective in the ecosystem that I'm in and the applications that I build, I could connect the GitHub repo to Netlify and Vercel, and I've got an application hosted in seconds, and I didn't do anything. So there is somebody's job that is gone, but there's also somebody's job that is more empowered now because of what I'm able to build. And there's more examples of this. There's a lot. So I co-host a podcast with Amy Dutton, who's my co-host. It's called Compressed.fm that you can find online. And inside of here, we have a cover image for each one of our episodes, and there's common things in here. So we have that's probably very faint, but we have the number, the logo, the title, the who it's with, and then we have images of both the host and the guest. This is something that we manually create in Figma. And then we export it and upload it to Sanity, where we store all the information, etc. But because of a tool called Cloudinary, we are able to automatically generate those images. We can tell Cloudinary to have a base image, to overlay these pieces of text and extra images, the pictures of us, depending on who the host and guests are, and they can automatically generate that for us, and we can tie into webhooks to then update that in Sanity after it's been created, and now all that stuff is automated. So you could look at this as part of my job has gone away, or part of Amy's job has gone away, but you can also look at it from a perspective of, because of that thing being automated, I have so much more time to do other things. I have so much more time to build more. Now think about this from other SaaS platforms as well. This is a pretty common story. I worked at Auth0. We'll talk more about that in a minute. Auth0 is identity security, basically authentication as a service, which means I don't have to be an expert to add authentication to my application. I think about a company called Zeta, which is a database company, and they do automatic branching now of your database connected to GitHub branches. So used to, you'd have to manually create new instances of your database. They can do this automatically, have it connected to a GitHub repo, do all of your testing back and forth. Really, really neat. And then I think about a couple of backend as a service platforms like Supabase and Zeta that I'm a big fan of, that kind of tie all this stuff together. They have database, they have authentication, real-time updates, all that stuff hosted and managed for you, which means as a developer, I can focus more on building the thing that I care about, which is a direct parallel in my mind to the impact that AI is having, or will continue to have. It also makes me think a little bit about the struggles of a developer advocate from a developer experience perspective. And I think about when I started at Auth0, I didn't know anything about authentication. Literally nothing. I had experience with different things, but literally no experience in authentication. And when I went to onboarding in Seattle, I took training on OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 and other buzzwords. So I had some of that technical background, but the dilemma is, the struggle as a developer advocate is, as we build these tools that are meant for other people to use, what's the balance of we're building these tools for you to not care versus do you need to have that knowledge? Like, do you need to know how OpenID Connect and OAuth 2 work? How many people could explain that articulately? I probably couldn't at this point. Probably not, but you've probably consumed services that do that for you. So it's this interesting mix in developer experience and developer relations and being a developer advocate of how much do I need to know to be able to actually teach that thing. I missed a slide that was meant to be with that whole conversation. And I think AI from a developer experience perspective is similar. So a few specific examples of developer experience. One is GitHub Copilot. Probably no surprise here. How many people are using GitHub Copilot? A lot of people. It's a paid product now, which is a tougher sell than it used to be. It was free for several months, and they went to paid, which makes sense eventually. I was a big GitHub Copilot skeptic. So I looked at, if GitHub Copilot is going to generate code for me, And if I have to spend any relatively significant amount of time definitely verifying, but fixing or changing the code that GitHub Copilot wrote for me, it's basically null and void, and it seemed like it would be a net negative for me. That was my original take. I even created a video on this of like, here's why I'm not using GitHub Copilot. In fairness, it wasn't because I had tried it and didn't like it. It was because I pre-assumed that it wouldn't be good enough, and I was 100% wrong. People that are using GitHub Copilot, I'm assuming you like it or you wouldn't still be paying for it. But GitHub Copilot was significantly better than anything that I imagined. The intelligence that it has around all the stuff that I've already done in my application in combination with the stuff that's already been done with open source projects in public. You can have an ethical conversation later about should it be that way, separate conversation from now, but the way it's able to have that context and bring it into my application is absolutely, or my development workflow is absolutely mind-blowing. But I do think there's one thing to consider with this, and it's the idea of your learning journey. I work a lot with beginner developers, people early in their career, and I'm a pretty big advocate of you probably shouldn't be using GitHub Copilot if you're a beginner developer. It's kind of the same. I see some hesitations, which is great. Love to have a deeper conversation. Oh, you're worried about that, not what I'm saying. Oh, okay. Be as loud as you want. You're good. I was hoping that would be a controversial face so we could have it out like live in front of everyone, but gum is fine. So general recommendation for me is to not use GitHub Copilot as a beginner because you have the same exact problem that you had with Stack Overflow. You copy and paste code. You throw it in there. This is how I got good grades in college. I did not learn very much if you've ever heard me talk about my journey. But you can copy and paste stuff, or you can let GitHub Copilot autocomplete stuff and really not know what's going on. So the thing I recommend for beginners is make sure if you do go down that path that you take the time to learn and research and interact with and dive deeper into the code that someone gives you. Same general concept of copying and pasting stuff from Stack Overflow. Now, there was an interesting take on this. I meant to include an image or a picture. I think it was a tweet thread from Roselle, who is a developer advocate for GitHub, specifically focused on GitHub Copilot. She's amazing. Find her, follow her, all the things. And she had this different take, slightly different take of like, she thinks it does make sense for beginner developers to use it because there's some things that you just don't want to get into the way of your learning journey. I want to build a thing to learn this thing. I don't want to stumble on this other piece in the middle to get to where I ultimately am focused on being. And I think that also makes sense. If that's not the thing that you're needing to learn today, because as a beginner and as an experienced developer, you've got infinite amount of things to learn and focus on. If you use that as a way to jump ahead to the specific part that you're looking to get better on, do that. All in all, from my perspective, GitHub Copilot, really good, way better than I ever expected. In comes ChatGPT. 5 million users in a day, 100 million users in 6 months. How many people are using ChatGPT? How many people have used it? Probably almost every hand. The holdout in the front, I love it. Aggressive like never, I love it. How many people consider themselves to use it on a semi-regular basis? Once a week, maybe, something like that. That's where I would throw myself in, probably more than once a week. And you can use this for everything. You can ask it anything. We'll talk about verifying those answers and the value of what it gives you in a second. We can debate that. But you can use this for anything. And I'm going to take a slightly different take on the impact that this is having on maybe a little less about developer experience, more about developer communities. So I run, I think we mentioned this in intro, thank you, a community called Learn, Build, Teach. We've got at least one member, maybe a few others, I think, that are here. Yes, Nick? So Learn, Build, Teach is a community based on this philosophy of mine of like as developers, we spend a lot of time learning, we use what we learn to build stuff, and then we teach other people how to build it too for their benefit, but selfishly for ours, but because the best way to learn is to teach kind of thing, right? It's been a personal philosophy of mine for a while. Community has grown, and I was looking for ways to get people more involved. And I thought, why don't we have like a discussion question every week to kind of spark conversations and get people on the same page. And I asked ChatGPT, can you give me 50 discussion questions that I can ask in Discord based on these topics? And it generated an array of 50. I then asked it to format it into an array so I could copy that directly into code. I stripped out maybe one question that didn't feel like a good fit, just stripped it out. So I think technically we have 49 or like 48 questions. copied and pasted that array into code, wrote a script to inject that into Supabase, which is what we're using for the backend for the Learn, Build, Teach website and Discord bot, and then wrote a script to interact with Discord. I used ChatGPT to figure out how to interact with some of the APIs because Discord documentation, not very good if you ever work with it, for my opinion. Sorry if you work for Discord. Did all of that, and now we have this automatically posted discussion question every week. So this is not an impact of I'm enabling developers to do more. AI enabled me as a developer to build a functionality to benefit the developer audience and the developer ecosystem faster, better, stronger, all the things than before. That I think is a pretty cool, seemingly non-direct impact, but does have direct impact on my life and ideally, like this may be a little dramatic, the other people's lives in my Discord. And more specifically from a developer's perspective, I think the most important aspect of this is the availability of the API, OpenAI API. So there's a direct consumer perspective where you go to ChatGPT, it's like chat.openai.com or whatever it is. You go there, you ask it anything, cool, fun, maybe it's whimsical, maybe it makes a difference, maybe it doesn't. The thing that really changes the game for developers is the incorporation or the availability of the API. In JavaScript, you can add a package and you have like 5 lines where you can then harness the power of ChatGPT in your application. Everything that ChatGPT could have done, you can incorporate that into your application. And we've seen tons of new products be built on this. One of my favorite is called VideoTap. This is created by a friend of mine, Chris, and I guess a couple of friends. So Chris and Otto and another person who I don't know as well. But they created this product, and Chris specifically has this knack for creating nice wrapper, beautiful packages around things. And so not to diminish the work that he's done, but all he's done with VideoTap is create that really nice wrapper around functionality that already exists because he can tap into the API. So what VideoTap does is it takes a YouTube link or you can upload a video and it generates a blog post. And it started with that. So it started by generating a blog post, and it's not just a direct transcription. It is doing headers, it's doing code snippets, it's doing links, it's doing organization of stuff. Now, to go back to like, I edit these after, right? Like I go back and try to get it in my voice, etc. But it gives that blog post to me. Because of the fact that it's simply basic, not simply because he's amazing and all the stuff they've done is amazing, but it is a wrapper around this immense power of OpenAI API, I asked for a few other features. I was like one of the most active users, and I was like, hey, what if we use this to create tweets and tweet threads and chapters and summaries and all these things? And not every time, but a lot of times when I would request these features, minutes later, he would say, go check it out. And that's because that power is there, exposed to him through an SDK, through an NPM package, that he can then harness and create this beautiful wrapper around it and then create something that changes my life as a content creator. There's a few other really cool examples of this. Astro is one of my favorite frameworks. I'm actually working on an Astro course at astrocourse.dev if you're interested. Astro took their documentation, ingested it somewhere, and built an AI specifically around their up-to-date documentation. So this chatbot, Houston AI, you can ask questions about Astro. Zeta database that I've mentioned a few times actually has this functionality built in to take advantage of from a developer perspective. So I could ingest stuff into Zeta. It'll do the magic things that then allow me to query as if it was ChatGPT specifically for that data that I've ingested into that database. And I think the key to this is that this impact feels different to me. It feels tangible. It feels real. It's different for me than Web3 was or crypto. It just feels different because I see the impact. I feel the impact every single day. But that's not to say that it's perfect. I've always had this kind of meme or GIF or whatever in my head with the caption of, as you can envision, a caption being, and we think AI is going to take over. And the picture associated with that is this. And specifically that, because how many times have you gone to wash your hands or to get soap and you look like a dumb whatever? Happens to me in every airport I go to. And so we think AI is taking over the world, but in some ways we can't even do something simple to constantly, safely recognize the movement of hands. There's a few other examples of this that question, long term, how many things we have to answer with AI as a whole. You've seen the self-driving cars with the cones. You put an orange cone on the car, it freaks out, doesn't know what to do and stop. There's actually, I think, like a worse example of this where several self-driving cars in an intersection stopped. I don't know how many, but like blocked traffic for, again, I don't know specifics, but like an amount of time that is very significant in a city like San Francisco. There's also an example of a lawyer who referenced ChatGPT in his like legal cases or whatever and blamed ChatGPT for tricking him into thinking that these cases that he could relate back to or refer back to existed when they really didn't. And you could go do research and kind of find articles like this of all the weird things that like Bing's ChatGPT has said, and you can go do your own research. The point of this is, it's not perfect. And another developer example for me specifically is I was using GitHub Copilot, writing a blog article comparing Astro and Next.js, comparing rendering strategy. So in Next.js, if you're familiar, there's a get static props function. And then I was continuing on to the next line, and GitHub Copilot said, additionally, if you needed blah, 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 blah in Next.js, you can use the get server side paths function. That does not exist for reference if you're not familiar. And so I thought that was funny, again, calling out the limitations of AI. What people fear is if AI was 100% correct. If AI was 100% correct, your job would be gone today. How could it not? If AI was 100% correct, the new reality from yesterday to today would be drastically different. And it would, in fact, be terrifying. Thankfully, it's not. And I use this to kind of wrap up, to think about the power of who we are, the impact of who we are. Because although ChatGPT can help write a title for me, it can write an abstract for me, it can give me ideas, it can brainstorm, it can write code for me, GitHub Copilot, same thing, it can't be me. So far, it can't be me on this stage. It can't be me having conversation with people after we get done. It can't be the community that you've built and invested in. It can't be a conference. It can't be all of those things, because those things don't go away, because the power of people is real. So in closing, as you look towards changes and impact of AI and all these things, and you get nervous and excited and there's mixed emotions, I would encourage you to spend some additional time thinking about the impact of people. This is especially true in the current economy. I was let go from my job. The reason I do content creation full time is I was let go from my job almost exactly a year ago, and I took that as an opportunity for myself to take that next step that I had been nervous to do for good financial reasons up until then. But now I get to do this full time. But so much of that is due to my connections with people, my network, for lack of a better word, my involvement in the community, the power of people. Thank you.